The heavy glass door of the private lounge shattered as a chair flew through it, sending diamond-like shards skittering across the marble floor. Minho didn't flinch at the noise. He kept his fingers wrapped around the throat of the man kneeling before him. Rainwater dripped from Minho's tailored lapel, mixing with the dark pool forming on the white floor. 40 women, the man gasped, his voice a wet rattle. 40 of the most powerful bloodlines in Asia were lined up for you. And you burned the syndicate down for her? Minho's grip tightened. His knuckles were white, his signet ring biting into the man's skin. He didn't answer with words. He looked at the small, cheap plastic earring clutched in his other hand, a piece of jewelry that smelled of coffee and industrial soap. He leaned in, his breath cold against the trader's ear. The bloodlines were empty, Minho whispered. She was the only thing that was real. Outside, sirens wailed, but the sound was distant, muffled by the heavy velvet curtains of the penthouse. To understand why the most feared man in Seoul was currently being labeled a terrorist by his own board of directors, the silk suits and the billion-dollar contracts have to disappear. The night the rain wouldn't stop, and a girl with a stained apron did something no assassin ever could, is where the truth lives. 6 months ago the world saw Minho as a machine. He moved through the Sunjin Tower like a ghost in a machine, his eyes never lingering on the women his father paraded in front of him. Matchmakers from Tokyo to Singapore failed. He rejected them all without a second glance, his signature on a rejection letter as sharp as a scalpel. He lived in a world of sanitized perfection, where every breath was calculated for the quarterly earnings report. Then came the gala at the Obsidian. The air smelled of expensive lilies and desperation. Minho stood on the balcony, his back to the glitter of the ballroom. His tie felt like a noose. He reached for a glass of water from a passing tray, but his fingers missed. The glass shattered at his feet. "I've got it," a voice said. It wasn't a cultured, soft tone. It was rough, hurried. A girl in a black vest and a white button-down with a faint mustard stain on the cuff dropped to her knees. She didn't call for a porter. She began picking up the shards with her bare hands. "Leave it," Minho said, his voice a low vibration. She didn't stop. A sliver of glass sliced her thumb. A single drop of blood hit the floor. She didn't gasp. She didn't look up at him with wide, pleading eyes. She just wiped the blood on her apron and kept moving. "You're bleeding," he remarked. "I'm working," she snapped back. She stood up, the tray of broken glass balanced perfectly on one hand. For the first time she looked him in the eye. Her pupils were blown wide from caffeine, and her hair was escaping a tight bun. She didn't bow. She didn't blush. She turned her back on the heir of the Sunjin syndicate and disappeared into the kitchen. Minho stood frozen. The diamond-encrusted women in the ballroom were watching, their whispers like the buzzing of flies. He ignored them. He walked toward the kitchen doors. "Sir, your father expects you at the head table," his assistant, Kim, whispered, stepping into his path. Minho brushed past him, his eyes fixed on the swinging double doors. He pushed them open to a world of steam, shouting, and the clatter of industrial dishwashers. He saw her at the back, leaning against a stainless steel counter, taping her thumb with duct tape. "What's your name?" he demanded. She didn't drop the tape. "Suji. And you're blocking the pass-through." "Suji," he repeated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of bills, tossing them onto the counter. "Leave. Now." She looked at the money, then back at him. She picked up the bills and handed them back. "I don't take tips for doing my job, and I don't leave mid-shift. Move or I'll have the chef throw you out." Minho's hand stayed extended. No one had ever handed him anything back. His world was built on taking. "You don't know who I am," he said. "I know you're the guy who can't hold a glass of water," she said, stepping around him to grab a stack of dinner plates. As she moved past, a man in a chef's coat stepped out of the walk-in freezer. His face was pale, his eyes darting to the security cameras. He didn't see Suji. He saw the heavy crate he was carrying, and he saw the tripwire he just stepped over. The floor didn't just shake, it groaned. A heavy rack of copper pans began to tilt. "Suji, move." Minho lunged. Minho didn't grab her waist. He slammed his shoulder into her, sending them both crashing into a stack of flour sacks just as 300 pounds of industrial metal slammed onto the spot where she'd been standing. The kitchen went silent, save for the hiss of a broken steam pipe. Minho looked down. Suji was pinned beneath him, her eyes wide, a streak of white flour across her cheek. "Are you?" he started. The back door of the kitchen kicked open. 3 men in tactical gear, their faces hidden by charcoal masks, stepped inside. They didn't look at the staff. They looked at Minho. Target acquired, one hissed into a radio. Minho realized then that the accident wasn't an accident. And the girl he'd just saved was now the only witness to a coup. He grabbed Suji's hand, his fingers locking around hers. Run, he commanded. They didn't head for the ballroom. They headed for the service elevator. As the doors began to slide shut, a bullet sparked off the metal frame. The elevator didn't go up to the penthouse. It shuddered, the lights flickering to a dull emergency red, and began to drop toward the basement levels where the syndicate kept the things they didn't want the sun to see. The basement air tasted of damp concrete and old oil. Minho didn't wait for the doors to fully open. He forced them apart with his hands, the metal groaning under the strain. He pulled Suji out into the dark, her sneakers squeaking on the wet floor. This way, he whispered, leading her toward the fleet of armored sedans. He reached for his key fob, but the lights of the cars remained dark. He tried the secondary override. Nothing. They've cut the signal, he muttered. There's a delivery bike, Suji said, pointing to a battered scooter tucked behind a concrete pillar. The keys are usually in the visor. She didn't wait for his permission. She ran to the scooter, flipped the visor, and caught the keys mid-air. She hopped on, the engine coughing to life with a wheeze that sounded nothing like the roar of Minho's Ferraris. Get on, she ordered. Minho looked at the tiny seat, then at the sound of heavy boots echoing in the stairwell. He swung his leg over, his expensive suit trousers straining. He wrapped his arms around her waist. She was thin, but her muscles were like tempered steel. They tore out of the garage just as the first black SUV rounded the corner. Suji didn't head for the main road. She swerved into an alley so narrow the side mirrors scraped the brickwork. They emerged into the neon chaos of Myeongdong. The rain was a curtain of silver, blurring the signs for skin cream and spicy rice cakes. Suji drove like a woman possessed, weaving between delivery trucks and late-night shoppers. Where are we going? She shouted over the wind. The safe house in Gangnam, he replied. No, she said. If I know about it, they know about it. We're going to my place. Your place. Minho's voice rose. It's a target. My place doesn't exist on a map, she shot back. She pulled the scooter into a junk-filled courtyard behind a 24-hour laundromat. She led him up a fire escape that creaked with every step, the metal slick with grease. Her apartment was a single room above the dryers. It smelled of detergent and scorched cotton. She locked the door with 4 separate deadbolts and leaned against it, her chest heaving. She looked at him, this man who cost more than the building she lived in, and then she started to laugh. What? He demanded, his hands clenched. You have flour in your eyebrows, she said, pointing. Minho walked to a cracked mirror over a tiny sink. He did. He looked ridiculous. He began to wipe it away, but his hands were shaking. He wasn't scared of the assassins. He was scared of the fact that for the first time in 28 years, he didn't know what was going to happen in the next 10 minutes. Suji walked over, took a damp rag and pushed his hands away. She wiped the flour from his face with steady, practiced movements. Her touch was light, but it felt like a brand. Why did you save me? She asked softly. I don't know, he admitted. 40 women, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I heard the waitresses talking. You rejected all of them. Why stop for the girl picking up trash? Minho looked at her reflection in the mirror. Because they were looking at the chair I sat in. You were the only one who looked at me. The moment was shattered by a low vibration. It wasn't the dryers. A red dot appeared on Minho's chest. It danced across his white shirt, settling over his heart. He tackled her again, the window exploding inward in a spray of crystalline glass. A high-velocity round punched through the wall where Suji's head had been a second ago. They crawled toward the back door, the smell of cordite filling the small room. How did they find us? She gasped. Minho looked at his wrist. His watch. The GPS tracker was embedded in the casing. He ripped it off and threw it toward the window. Go to the roof, he commanded. There's a bridge to the next building. They scrambled up the ladder, the rain blinding them. The roof was a forest of vents and satellite dishes. Across the gap, a black-clad figure stood on the adjacent building, a long-range rifle leveled at them. Minho didn't have a weapon. He had a lead pipe he'd grabbed from the stairwell. Jump, he yelled. Suji leaped across the 4-foot gap, her fingers catching the edge of the brick. Minho followed, his heavy shoes nearly slipping. He pulled her up just as a bullet sparked off the ledge. They ran through a maze of laundry lines, white sheets flapping like ghosts in the wind. Minho grabbed a handful of sheets and threw them over the lines, creating a blinding white corridor. They can't see us. Suji yelled. They don't need to see, Minho said. They just need to spray. As if on cue, a flurry of rounds tore through the fabric. Minho pushed Suji behind a brick chimney. He looked at the distance to the street. It was 3 stories down. There was a dumpster full of cardboard. "Trust me?" he asked. She looked at the dumpster, then at the shadow of the sniper moving through the sheets. She grabbed his hand. "No," she said. "But I have a shift tomorrow and I'm not missing it." They jumped. The impact was a dull thud that knocked the wind out of them. Minho scrambled out of the cardboard, his suit in tatters. He pulled Suji out, her face pale but her eyes burning. "We need a car," he said. "I know a guy," she replied, leading him toward a garage that smelled of illegal exhausts and cheap beer. Inside, a man with grease-stained arms was working on a modified sedan. He looked up, his eyes widening at the sight of Minho. "Is that?" "Don't ask, Jean," Suji said. "We need the gray ghost. Now." Jean didn't argue. He tossed them a set of keys. Minho took the driver's seat this time. The engine didn't wheeze, it roared. "Where to now?" Suji asked as they tore out onto the street. "The docks," Minho said. "My father's second-in-command has a freighter. If I can get to the manifests, I can prove who ordered the hit." "It was your father, wasn't it?" Suji asked, her voice quiet. Minho didn't blink. He doesn't like loose ends. And he doesn't like being told, no. They reached the docks, the cranes looming like giant skeletons against the gray sky. The freighter, the Gilded Lily, was docked at Pier 9. Security was light, too light. "Wait here," Minho said. "Fat chance," Suji replied, grabbing a heavy wrench from the glove box. They slipped onto the ship, the metal decks vibrating with the hum of the engines. They found the captain's office. Minho sat at the computer, his fingers flying across the keys. The screen flickered. A list of transactions appeared. It wasn't a hit on Minho. It was a sale. The Sunjin syndicate wasn't being taken over. It was being sold to a rival family in Shanghai. And Minho was part of the deal. The 40 women weren't brides. They were distractions to keep him from seeing the accounting. "He sold you?" Suji whispered, reading over his shoulder. "He sold us all," Minho said. A shadow fell across the doorway. Kim, Minho's assistant, stood there. He wasn't holding a tablet anymore. He was holding a silenced Glock. "The chairman thought you might be too smart for your own good, Minho," Kim said. But he didn't count on the waitress. Kim shifted his aim toward Suji. "If you believe Suji deserved better than being a pawn in a billionaire's war, hit the like button so her story reaches someone who needs to hear it." Minho didn't reach for a gun. He reached for the fire suppression lever on the wall. "Suji, hold your breath." He pulled it. A thick cloud of CO2 flooded the room, turning everything to a white blur. A shot rang out, hitting the metal desk. Minho lunged low. He lunged low, sweeping Kim's legs. The gun clattered across the floor. They fought in the dark, the sound of fists hitting flesh the only rhythm. Minho was a trained fighter, but Kim was desperate. "Suji, the gun." Suji scrambled on the floor, her fingers brushing the cold metal. She grabbed it, but a heavy boot slammed onto her hand. "Drop it, girl," Kim hissed. Minho roared, grabbing Kim from behind and slamming him into the reinforced glass window. The glass cracked. He slammed him again. "Tell him," Minho growled. "Tell him I'm coming for the crown." He threw Kim through the window. The man hit the water with a splash that was swallowed by the churning wake of the freighter. Minho turned to Suji. She was holding her hand, her face contorted. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," she said. "I've had worse burns from the grill." She looked at the computer screen. "What now?" "We're on a boat to China." "No," Minho said, pointing to a small button on the console. "We're on a boat that's about to have a very public engine failure in the middle of the harbor." He hit the button. A series of alarms began to blare. "We need to go," he said. They jumped into the freezing water just as the freighter's engines seized, the ship drifting into the path of a massive tanker. The chaos would draw every news crew in the city. They washed up on a small rocky beach an hour later. They were shivering, their clothes clinging to them. Minho looked at the city skyline. The Sunjin Tower was the tallest building, a beacon of light. "It's over," Suji said. "No," Minho said, standing up. "It's just beginning." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "I can't go back to who I was. And I can't let you go back to that kitchen." "I have a life, Minho," she reminded him. "I know," he said. "But would you consider a promotion? I'm going to need a partner to burn that tower down." Suji looked at her taped thumb, then at the man who had rejected 40 princesses for a girl who smelled like coffee. "Does it come with health insurance?" she asked. Minho laughed, a real genuine sound that echoed off the rocks. "The best." They walked toward the road, their shadows long in the moonlight. The skyline of Seoul at midnight was a jagged heart monitor of neon and steel. Minho watched the reflection of the city in the floor-to-ceiling glass of his penthouse. The suit he wore cost more than Suji's entire neighborhood, but it felt like lead. "You're a machine, Minho. Machines don't have hearts. They have functions." His father's voice rattled through his head. He turned away from the window. On his desk sat 40 files. Each one contained a woman's life, condensed into assets, alliances and bloodline purity. He didn't see names. He saw trade agreements. He swept them off the desk, watching them scatter like fallen leaves. His phone vibrated. A single text from an unsaved number. "The Gilded Lily has docked at Pier 9. The move had begun. Park was liquidating the syndicate's assets. The sale to Shanghai wasn't just a business move, it was an execution. Minho was being traded away for a piece of the shipping empire. He grabbed a heavy leather bag and checked the weight of the handgun inside. His palms didn't sweat. His heart didn't race. He was a machine after all. He slipped out the service entrance, avoiding his own security. In the alley, Suji was waiting. She wasn't in her waitress uniform anymore. She wore a dark hoodie and cargo pants, her hair tucked into a beanie. She looked like a shadow among shadows. "You're late," she said, her breath fogging in the cold air. "The machine had a glitch," Minho replied. She didn't ask what he meant. She handed him a helmet and kicked the kickstand of the gray ghost. The engine's roar was the only heartbeat he trusted. They tore through the city, the wind cutting through his thin silk shirt. Suji drove like she had nothing to lose because, in this world, she didn't. She was the ghost that the syndicate never accounted for. As they reached the docks, the smell of salt and rust became a wall. Park's men were everywhere, their flashlights cutting through the mist. Minho signaled Suji to stay back. "I don't stay back," she whispered, her fingers tightening on a heavy wrench. "I stay even." They moved through the stacks of containers, the silence broken only by the distant groaning of metal. Minho saw Park standing near the gangplank of the freighter. He was holding a briefcase, his face lit by the orange glow of a nearby floodlight. Minho stepped into the light. The flashlights converged on him instantly. "The prodigal son," Park sneered, his voice like dry parchment. "You should have stayed in the penthouse, Minho. It's warmer there." "I prefer the cold," Minho said, his hand hovering over the bag. "The chairman sold you out." "You're yesterday's news," Park said, stepping closer. "But the girl, she's an interesting variable. Why save a waitress?" Minho didn't look at Suji, but he could feel her presence at his back. "Because she's the only one who didn't want anything from me." Park laughed, a jagged sound that died in the wind. "In this city, everyone wants something. Even her." The betrayal hit him then, not from Park but from the realization that he was standing on a trap. The containers around them began to hiss. "Gas!" Minho roared. He grabbed Suji and dove behind a stack of steel drums just as the white fog erupted. Park's men didn't wear masks, they were already collapsing. This wasn't Park's move. It was the chairman's. Minho's father was cleaning house. All of them, the traitors, the son, and the witness. He pulled his shirt over his face and looked at Suji. Her eyes were watering, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He pressed his own shirt against her mouth, breathing in the poison so she wouldn't have to. The darkness began to claw at the edges of his vision. He felt a hand on his shoulder, not Suji's. "I told you, Minho," the lizard voice whispered in his ear. "Machines have functions. Yours is to expire." He swung blindly, his fist connecting with something hard. He heard a grunt and the sound of a briefcase hitting the concrete. He reached out, his fingers brushing the handle. If you think Minho's father is the real villain for sacrificing his own son, leave a like so the algorithm knows the story matters. The world tilted. He felt himself being dragged. Suji was pulling him toward the water. "Don't sleep," she hissed, her voice a million miles away. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The salt water burned his lungs, snapping his eyes open. They were under the pier, the dark water hiding them from the flashlights above. "The briefcase," Minho wheezed, the handle still locked in his grip. "Forget the money," Suji said, her teeth chattering. "It's not money," Minho said, his voice a low vibration. "It's the keys to the kingdom." He opened the case. Inside were 40 small glass vials. The bloodlines. His father wasn't just trading alliance. He was selling the genetic data of the 40 most powerful families in Asia. It was the ultimate blackmail. Minho looked at the vials, then at the girl shivering next to him. "We have to burn it," she said. Minho looked back at the freighter. "No. We have to use it." The safe house was a basement in a part of Seoul that didn't appear on tourist maps. It smelled of damp earth and old electronics. Minho sat on a crate, his wet suit drying in stiff, salt-crusted layers. On the table before him, the 40 vials caught the flickering light of a single bare bulb. Suji was at the workbench, her fingers flying across a laptop she'd salvaged from a junk pile. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a surgeon of data. "He's using the Shanghai servers to host the decryption keys," she said, her eyes fixed on the code. "If I can get in, I can wipe the data before the sale goes through." "How long?" Minho asked. 10 minutes if I'm lucky. 5 if they realize I'm here," she replied. Minho looked at the vials. Each one represented a life, a family, a legacy. His father had turned people into commodities. He picked up one vial, the one labeled Kim. The girl from the Tokyo bloodline. She was 22, a concert pianist who didn't know her life was being used as collateral. "They think I'm dead," Minho said. "They won't for long," Suji said. "The news is already reporting the explosion at the docks. Your father is giving a press conference at the Sunjin Tower in an hour." Minho stood up. The machine was back online, but the programming had changed. He wasn't functioning for the syndicate anymore. He was functioning for justice. He grabbed a dark coat and checked his reflection in a cracked mirror. He looked like a ghost. "I'm going to the tower," he said. Suji stopped typing. She looked at him, her face pale in the blue light of the screen. "That's suicide. The security is tighter than a drum." "They're looking for a machine," Minho said. "They aren't looking for a son." He leaned over and kissed her forehead. A brief human moment that felt more real than anything he'd ever known in the penthouse. "Finish the upload," he commanded. He took the gray ghost and tore through the city, the cold air biting his face. The Sunjin Tower loomed over the city like a giant glass tombstone. He didn't use the front door. He used the service elevator he'd used with Suji 6 months ago. The lobby was a hive of reporters and cameras. His father was on the podium, his face a mask of grief. "My son was a hero," the chairman said, his voice breaking with practiced precision. "He died protecting the syndicate's future." Minho stepped out of the shadows at the back of the room. The flashbulbs were blinding. "I'm not a hero," Minho's voice projected through the hall, cutting through his father's lies like a blade. "And I'm certainly not dead." The silence that followed was absolute. The chairman's face turned from grief to a mask of pure, crystalline rage. "Minho," the chairman whispered, his grip tightening on the podium. "The data you're trying to sell, it's gone," Minho said, stepping into the light. "Every family in this city knows what you did. They know you turned their children into trade chips." His father signaled the security guards, but they didn't move. They were looking at their phones. Suji had finished the upload. The emails had been sent. The blackmail was no longer a secret. It was a public declaration of war. "You've destroyed us," the chairman hissed. "No," Minho said, his eyes cold. "I've just turned the machine off." He walked toward the podium, the reporters parting like the Red Sea. He leaned in, his breath cold against his father's ear. "You rejected 40 women for a deal," Minho whispered. "I rejected the deal for one." Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything for the truth. The chairman reached into his coat, his hand emerging with a small, silver pistol. He didn't aim at Minho. He aimed at the crowd. "If I go down, the city goes with me," the chairman roared. Minho didn't hesitate. He lunged, his body a blur of motion. The shot rang out, a sharp crack that echoed through the glass tower. The bullet shattered a decorative vase behind Minho, sending porcelain shards flying. He didn't stop. He slammed his shoulder into his father's chest, the two of them tumbling off the podium. The reporters scrambled, a sea of panic and flashing cameras. Minho pinned his father to the floor, his hand locking around the chairman's wrist. The older man's eyes were bloodshot, his face a map of broken pride. "You were supposed to be my masterpiece," the chairman wheezed, the silver pistol clattering across the marble. "I'm nobody's masterpiece," Minho said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. The security guards finally moved, but not toward Minho. They were surrounding the chairman, their expressions grim. They weren't protecting the boss, they were detaining a liability. The syndicate's board of directors had made their choice. Minho stood up, his suit torn, his knuckles bleeding. He didn't look back at his father as they dragged the old man away. He looked at the giant screen behind the podium. It was Suji. She had bypassed the tower's internal feed. Her face, grainy and lit by the blue glow of her laptop, filled the room. "The data is secure," she said, her voice steady. "And the chairman's private accounts have been liquidated. Every cent is being returned to the families he exploited." The room erupted. The families of the 40 women were there, some of the most powerful people in the country. They didn't see a criminal, they saw a whistleblower. Minho walked out of the tower, the cold air of the street hitting him like a blessing. He didn't wait for the press. He didn't wait for the board. He took a taxi to the laundromat. The fire escape was still slick with grease. The room above the dryers was empty. He sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room heavier than the noise of the tower. He looked at the duct tape on the small sink, the tape Suji had used on her thumb the night they met. He stayed there until the sun began to bleed over the horizon, turning the city into a wash of gold and gray. "You look like hell," a voice said from the doorway. Suji was standing there, her hoodie torn, her eyes tired but bright. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. "The machine is broken," Minho said. "Good," she replied, handing him a cup. "I like you better as a man." They sat in the small room, the hum of the dryers beneath them the only sound. The Sunjin Tower was still there, but it was just a building now. The syndicate was a ghost. "Where do we go?" Minho asked. "Wherever the rain doesn't follow us," she said. "If you believe the quiet assistant was the real villain for following orders, drop a like so the algorithm knows the story matters." They left the room, the door clicking shut on a life of silk and steel. They didn't take the armored cars. They didn't take the money. They took a bus to the coast, the city shrinking in the rearview mirror. As the bus pulled into the station at dawn, the ocean appeared, a vast, blue expanse that didn't care about bloodlines or assets. Minho looked at Suji, the light of the new day catching the scar on her thumb. "I told them no to 40 women, he said softly. "I know," she said. "I'm glad I stopped for the 41st, he whispered. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers. The world didn't end. It just began. The coast was a jagged line of gray rocks and white foam. They found a small house at the edge of a cliff, a place where the salt air rotted the wood but cleared the mind. Minho spent his days fixing the roof, his hands becoming calloused and scarred. He didn't miss the silk. He didn't miss the tower. Suji worked at a local clinic, her hands steady, her eyes no longer wide from caffeine. They were ghosts in this town, the billionaire and the waitress, but they were the only real things in each other's lives. One evening, as the sun was sinking into the sea, a black car pulled into the driveway. It didn't belong here. It was too clean, too expensive. Minho stepped onto the porch, a hammer in his hand. A man stepped out of the car. It was Kim. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a simple coat, his face pale. "I thought you were in Switzerland," Minho said, his voice cold. "The chairman is in Switzerland," Kim said. "I'm just a messenger." He handed Minho an envelope. It was thick, heavy with the weight of the past. "The board wants you back," Kim said. "The company is failing. They need the machine." Minho didn't open the envelope. He looked at the ocean. "The machine is dead," Minho said. "They're offering everything," Kim persisted. "The tower, the assets, the power." "I already have everything," Minho said, gesturing to the house and the woman standing in the doorway. Kim looked at Suji, then back at Minho. He bowed deeply, a sign of respect that he'd never truly given when he was the chairman's shadow. "He wants to see you," Kim said. "Before the end." Minho looked at Suji. She didn't say a word, but her eyes told him what he needed to know. The past wasn't finished with them. "I'll be back," Minho said. He traveled to Switzerland, the mountains a cold, white wall. The clinic was a fortress of glass and silence. His father was in a room at the top, his body hooked to machines that hummed and beeped. The chairman looked small. The man who had ruled an empire was now a prisoner of his own pulse. "You came?" the chairman wheezed. "I came to tell you goodbye," Minho said. "I did it for you," the chairman said, his voice a dry rattle. "I built it all for you." "You built it for a machine," Minho said. "But you forgot to build a man." The chairman reached out, his fingers trembling. "The 40 women, they were the best of the best." "They were empty," Minho said. "She was the only one who saw me." The chairman closed his eyes, his breath hitching. "You were always a disappointment, Minho." "I know," Minho said. "It's the best thing I ever did." He walked out of the room, the silence of the clinic closing behind him. He didn't look back. He took a flight home, the ocean appearing beneath him like a promise. As he walked up the path to the house, Suji was waiting on the porch. She was holding a cup of coffee. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done," he said. He took the coffee and looked at the horizon. The syndicate was a memory. The 40 women were a story. He was just a man standing on a cliff, holding the hand of the only woman who ever mattered. The peace of the cliffside house was a fragile thing. A month after the trip to Switzerland, the news broke. The Sunjin syndicate hadn't just collapsed, it had been devoured. A rival firm, the Kuroda Group from Tokyo, had moved in, using the data Suji had leaked to dismantle the remaining pieces of the empire. But they weren't satisfied with the remains. They wanted the source. Minho was in the small garden behind the house when he heard the drone. It was a high-pitched whine, barely audible over the crashing of the waves. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't a hobbyist drone. It was a surveillance unit, military grade. "Suji," he yelled. She ran out of the back door, her face pale. "I see it." "Get the bag," Minho commanded. They didn't have much. A few sets of clothes, the laptop, and the leather case with the vials. They didn't know if the Kuroda Group wanted the data or revenge, but they weren't going to wait to find out. They took the gray Ghost, the engine screaming as they tore down the winding coastal road. Behind them, 2 black SUVs appeared, their headlights cutting through the dusk like the eyes of predators. "They're coming for the drives," Suji shouted over the wind. "Let them come," Minho said, his jaw set. He swerved onto a dirt track that led toward the old lighthouse. It was a dead end, a finger of rock jutting into the sea. The SUVs followed, their tires kicking up a storm of dust. Minho pulled the scooter to a halt at the edge of the cliff. He grabbed the bag and looked at the SUVs as they skidded to a stop, blocking the only way out. 4 men stepped out, their suits sharp, their eyes hidden by sunglasses even in the fading light. The man in the lead was younger, his face a mask of arrogance. "Minho," the man said, his voice smooth. "My name is Hiro. I believe you have something that belongs to my family." "The data is public," Minho said. "The public data is a mess," Hiro said. "We want the master drives. The ones the waitress is holding." Minho looked at Suji. She was standing at the very edge of the cliff, the bag held tight to her chest. "You won't get them," she said. Hiro laughed. "In this world, everyone gets what they want. It's just a matter of price." "The price is already paid," Minho said, stepping forward. He didn't have a weapon, but he had the terrain. He knew the lighthouse had an old service tunnel that led to the sea caves below. "Suji now." She didn't jump. She threw the bag. It sailed over the edge of the cliff, disappearing into the white foam of the waves. Hiro's face turned from arrogance to pure, unadulterated rage. He pulled a gun, but Minho was already moving. He tackled Hiro, the 2 of them hitting the dirt with a thud. The other men lunged, but Suji was ready. She grabbed a heavy flare from the scooter's sidecar and ignited it, the blinding red light filling the space. The men recoiled, and in the chaos, Minho and Suji slipped through the rusted door of the lighthouse. They scrambled down the spiral stairs, the air thick with the smell of salt and decay. The tunnel was at the bottom, a narrow, wet passage that felt like the throat of a beast. "They're right behind us," Suji wheezed. They reached the sea cave, the water surging in and out with a rhythmic roar. There was a small inflatable boat hidden in a crevice, something Minho had prepared weeks ago. "Get in," he said. They pushed off just as the first flashlight hit the water. The cave was a maze of shadows and jagged rock. Minho paddled with a fury he hadn't felt since the night at the Obsidian. They emerged into the open sea, the lighthouse a tiny spark of light behind them. The bag Suji had thrown wasn't lost. It was floating 100 yards away, tied to a buoy. "You're a genius," Minho whispered. "I'm a waitress," she said, her teeth chattering. "We're good at handling bags." They retrieved the data and headed for the deep water, the city of Seoul a distant, glowing ghost on the horizon. The island was a paradise. The island was a paradise of green palms and white sand, but paradise has its own shadows. For 6 months, Minho and Suji lived in a small bungalow, their days spent fishing and their nights spent watching the stars. They were free, but they were also waiting. They knew that a billion-dollar secret doesn't stay buried forever. The end came on a Tuesday. Minho was on the beach pulling in a net when he saw the helicopter. It was a sleek, black bird, the logo of the Kuroda Group visible on its side. It landed on the far end of the beach, kicking up a storm of sand. Minho didn't run. He stood his ground, the wet net draped over his shoulder. A woman stepped out of the helicopter. She was tall, her hair a sharp bob, her suit white and pristine. She didn't look like an assassin, she looked like an executive. Minho, she said, her voice clear and cold. I am Akane Kuroda. You're a long way from Tokyo, Minho said. I'm here to make you an offer, she said. The data you have, it's a weapon. In the wrong hands it could destroy nations. In the right hands it could stabilize the market. I don't care about the market, Minho said. I know, Akane said. But you care about the girl. She signaled to the helicopter. Two men stepped out and between them was Suji. Her hands were zip-tied, her face bruised. Minho's grip on the net tightened until his knuckles were white. The machine inside him flickered to life, the cold, calculating part of his brain taking over. Let her go, Minho said, his voice a low vibration. Give me the master drive, Akane said. And she walks. Minho looked at Suji. She didn't look scared, she looked angry. She shook her head, a silent plea for him not to give in. The drive is in the bungalow, Minho said. Go get it, Akane commanded. Minho walked toward the bungalow, the guards following him. He entered the room, the smell of Suji's perfume lingering in the air. He didn't go for the drive. He went for the small, heavy box beneath the floorboards. It wasn't a drive. It was a remote detonator. He walked back out onto the beach, the box held high. This is the master drive, he lied, his voice steady. But it's also a dead man's switch. If I let go of this button, the entire system wipes itself. Every bit of data, every blackmail file, every cent of the Kuroda Group's hidden assets. Gone. Akane's face turned pale. You're bluffing. Try me, Minho said. He looked at Suji. Run. She didn't hesitate. She slammed her elbow into the guard's ribs and dove toward the water. The guards reached for their guns, but Akane screamed at them to stop. If you shoot him, we lose everything. Suji reached the water, the blue waves swallowing her. Minho looked at Akane, his thumb hovering over the button. You rejected 40 women for power, Minho said. I'm rejecting power for one. He pressed the button. The helicopter didn't explode. The bungalow didn't burn. But on the screen of Akane's tablet, the numbers began to tumble. The Kuroda Group's accounts were being drained, the data they'd fought for turning into static. You monster, Akane whispered. I'm just a man, Minho said. He dove into the water, the salt stinging his eyes. He swam toward Suji, their hands meeting beneath the surface. They stayed underwater until their lungs burned, then emerged 100 yards away, hidden by the coral reef. The helicopter took off, Akane's screams lost in the roar of the rotors. They were gone. Minho and Suji washed up on a small sandbar. They were shivering, their clothes clinging to them. Minho looked at the beach. The bungalow was a tiny speck in the distance. Is it gone? Suji wheezed. Everything, Minho said. The data, the money, the past. It's all zero. Suji started to laugh, a ragged, beautiful sound. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Good, she said. Zero is a good place to start. If this story broke your heart the way it broke mine, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. They stayed on the sandbar until the sun went down, the world quiet and vast. 2 years later, the city of Seoul was a memory, a distant neon dream. Minho and Suji lived in a small village in the south of Italy, a place where the lemons grew as big as fists and the air smelled of rosemary and dust. Minho was the local handyman, his hands permanently stained with grease and would stain. He was happy. Suji ran a small cafe on the corner, her coffee the best in the province. She didn't wear an apron anymore, but she still looked him in the eye every time he walked through the door. One afternoon, as the sun was setting over the olive groves, a man walked into the cafe. He was wearing a sharp, dark suit, a strange sight in this village. He sat at the counter and ordered an espresso. Suji served him, her movements practiced and calm. She didn't recognize him at first, but when he looked up, she froze. Was Kim. I'm not here to bring you back, Kim said, his voice soft. The syndicate is gone. The Kuroda Group is bankrupt. There's nothing left to go back to. Then why are you here? Suji asked. I wanted to see if it was true, Kim said. If a machine can really become a man. Minho walked in then, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a toolbox in his hand. He saw Kim and stopped. The machine is dead, Kim, Minho said. I see that, Kim said, standing up. He handed Minho a small, battered photograph. It was of the two of them, Minho and Suji, on the night of the gala. They were standing on the balcony, the city lights behind them. They looked like strangers. The chairman died last week, Kim said. His last words were about you. What did he say? Minho asked. He said you were the only one who won, Kim said. Kim walked out of the cafe, his black car disappearing down the winding road. Minho looked at the photograph, then at Suji. He was wrong, Minho said. About what? She asked. I didn't win, he said, taking her hand. I just found home. He looked at her, the light of the setting sun catching the scar on her thumb. I told them no to 40 women, he said softly. I know, she said. I'm glad I stopped for you, he whispered. He leaned in, and the kiss tasted of coffee and lemons and a life that was finally perfectly real. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything for the truth. Because sometimes the best thing you can find in the trash is yourself. Everything about the Sunjin Empire had been a lie. The marble, the private jets, the curated bloodlines, it was a cage designed to keep him from ever feeling the ground beneath his feet. But as he watched the sunset over the Mediterranean, Minho realized he wasn't a disappointment to his father's legacy. He was the only part of it that had survived. He wasn't a tool or a successor or a machine. He was a man who had traded $1 billion for a cup of coffee and a hand to hold. And as the stars began to poke through the violet Italian sky, he knew he'd make the same trade every single day for the rest of his life.